Welcome everyone to another episode of Fins Nation. I'm your host, Louis Sung, and today we're going to look into the signings made by the Miami Dolphins during the first official day of free agency. Now that teams can actually talk to players that are coming from other teams, the Miami Dolphins wasted no time in adding some extra names to this list. While the names are not necessarily wow-worthy, there's clearly an attempt being made to add some much-needed depth. So we'll go into the players that the Miami Dolphins have decided to add, but first, this show is brought to you by PrizePicks.com. PrizePicks.com is a revolutionary fantasy platform where you can now pick up to 6 different players across professional sports leagues. If you want to go with the NFL primarily, you can do that. If you want to go into the NBA because you're an expert at the NBA, you can do that too. You can go ahead and combine your picks if you want to do that. It's totally up to you to decide how you choose your picks. All you have to do is choose the over or the under on those players' individual fantasy projections, whether that's just stats or classic fantasy point projections. They will give you free squares. They will give you Taco Tuesday promos. There are Flex Friday specials. Every once in a while, they throw other promos at you that you can take advantage of. And for things like that, it's really hard to justify not signing up at this point, especially if you're somebody who really enjoys fantasy sports. So if you haven't done so already, go to prizepicks.com, use the promo code 5, that's F-I-V-E, and they will match up to $100 on your deposit when you sign up using that promo code. It's basically a free $100 that you are getting from PrizePicks just after you put in your $100. So go to prizepicks.com, use that promo code 5, F-I-V-E, and they will match up to $100 when you sign up. Also, if you are a South Florida resident and you're looking to protect your home or business with impact-rated windows and doors, make sure you contact All Pro Construction Builders. They specialize in impact windows and doors and for residential and commercial properties. And All Pro Construction Builders is a state-certified, licensed, and insured general contractor that services Miami-Dade, Monroe, and Broward counties. They only use top-quality products that are locally made, and they are family-owned and operated business, and you will only deal with the owner from start to finish. They offer competitive and affordable pricing, as well as 100% financing with no upfront costs or down payment. So if you are looking for a trustworthy and reliable contractor who offers quality service, make sure to contact All Pro Construction Builders. They will provide you with a free estimate and help you protect your home in less than 8 weeks. Call Danny at 305-484-4429 and make sure to mention 5 Reasons Sports to get a 10% discount. Again, that's Danny at 305-484-4429, All Pro Construction Builders. So let's jump right in with all these players that the Miami Dolphins have added on. So, as of March 15, 2023, that Miami Dolphins, obviously, they went ahead and they added Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson, so the running back room is pretty much set at that point because they had already brought back Salvon Ahmed as well. Well, on March 15th, they decided to also bring back Myles Gaskin to a 1-year contract. Now, this does not necessarily mean that Myles Gaskin is a lock to make the 53-man roster. This seems more like an idea of trying to see if maybe something changes in training camp. Maybe he beats out Salvon Ahmed somehow. I personally don't think so. I think Salvon Ahmed's pretty much got the third running back spot on lock unless there's a rookie that they decide to draft. But to have Myles Gaskin in camp, it can't hurt anything. I sincerely doubt there's any guaranteed money on this. He's basically competing for his career at this point. So I'm not bothered by the signing of Myles Gaskin. He knows the system. He would easily be able to step in if something happens to Salvon Ahmed. Maybe he makes it back to the practice squad or something along those lines if they decide to go that route. So Myles Gaskin coming back, it's whatever. I'm not upset by it. I know that there are a lot of other Dolphins fans out there that are actually rather disappointed by this because basically they did not want the Miami Dolphins to stand pat with the running back position. As I said on yesterday's show, the rumors about Derrick Henry, Dalvin Cook, Austin Eckler, and now with the impending release of Ezekiel Elliott from the Cowboys, they pretty much wanted to kick the tires on every single player they could get their hands on. They're seeing Ezekiel Elliott as being a former rushing champion. He is someone who, in his prime, was a fantastic running back for the Dallas Cowboys. In some ways, he basically was their offense for quite some time. But that was the Ezekiel Elliott of old. I really don't think he has much to offer at this point, especially not compared to guys like Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson Jr., who, as I brought up yesterday, both of those guys had the capability of running for 1,000 yards if they had had more opportunities to run the football with Miami. They both could have pulled it off. So what does Ezekiel Elliott bring to the table except a name? Like, can you tell me what Ezekiel Elliott does that Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson can't? Is it rushing with power? He's been struggling to get anywhere with the Dallas Cowboys. That's why the Cowboys have decided to part ways with him and actually decide instead to keep Tony Pollard, because they found a guy who's better than their former rushing champion. So why do we want the Dallas Cowboys scraps? If it was somebody like a Derrick Henry, who year after year after year has shown no signs of not being an MVP caliber running back, if it was not somebody like a Dalvin Cook, who year after year is a fantastic rusher and can do pretty much everything that is asked of him, if it wasn't someone like an Austin Eckler, who is literally the Los Angeles Chargers offense because Justin Herbert practically looks at him first on every single down, because as a receiver and as a running back, he can do it all. What does Ezekiel Elliott do? At least all three of the previously mentioned guys, they didn't struggle. They were always good, so they'd be at the top of their game. Ezekiel Elliott is trying to make a comeback. What are you going to pay Ezekiel Elliott? The real question you have to ask is, what does Ezekiel Elliott think Ezekiel Elliott is worth? Because if he thinks he's worth $7 million a year, if he's even worth $6 million a year, I'm not doing it. I'm not going to do it, because Ezekiel Elliott's going to walk into training camp and assume that he's the starter because he's Ezekiel Elliott. Is he going to compete with Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson for the starting job? Or are you going to go off of the allure, the reputation that he built in Dallas and just say he's the guy? We did that once with Arian Foster. It didn't work out so good, because Arian Foster, I remember he was the guy for the Houston Texans for a very long time. When he got to Miami, he was awful. He was awful, okay? So forgive me if I'm not jumping at the bit to grab Ezekiel Elliott and add him to this Miami Dolphins roster. I'm perfectly content with Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson, and if Myles Gaskin wants to come in and play and try to prove that he can still be useful, even if it's for another team, maybe he's auditioning for another team. If even that much, then so be it. I'm not going to lose sleep over it. He's probably not going to make the team. Whatever. Like it matters. So, again, running back is set. I'm perfectly content with running back. So what else did the Miami Dolphins do? They claimed wide receiver Freddie Swain from the Denver Broncos waivers, and Freddie Swain did spend some time with the Miami Dolphins practice squad in 2022. So basically, he's a special teamer. I'm not going to lose sleep over him either. He's a depth piece. Maybe he becomes a returner, because it seems to me, especially after the tweet that was sent out by Trent Sherfield, that we are going to lose our number 3 wide receiver. So maybe that gives Cedric Wilson the opening he needed to come back and say, okay, I can still do this. Because at least early on, it was pretty clear that Cedric Wilson was not 100% healthy. Maybe now that he is going to be 100% healthy, maybe he can come back and show that he's still the guy that we initially signed with the Dallas Cowboys. And there was talk around the combine, reports that come out, that the Cowboys regretted letting Cedric Wilson go. Well, based on what we saw last year of Cedric Wilson, nobody would be able to explain to you why. They would have to go back and watch his Dallas tape. In Miami, Cedric Wilson didn't really do much of anything. So maybe the loss of Trent Sherfield will give Cedric Wilson the opening he needs to show that Miami's not hurting for a third wide receiver. So Freddie Swain doesn't really move the needle for me, but if he can be a returner, because hopefully Cedric Wilson won't have to be anymore, I'm down for that. Works for me. Perfectly happy with that as well. Now we have to talk about something interesting. Let's talk about Kendall Lamb. So just some background for Kendall Lamb, just so everybody kind of gets an idea of this guy. He's 30 years old, and he was originally signed by the Houston Texans back in 2015 as an undrafted free agent. He spent 3 years with the Houston Texans, joined the Cleveland Browns for 2 years after that, and then in 2021 he spent it with the Tennessee Titans. And then he signed with the Lions last offseason, but didn't make it to the offensive line with them, and he ended up getting cut. So now here comes Kendall Lamb to the practice squad in November for the Miami Dolphins, and the following month he gets promoted to the active roster, because pretty much everybody was getting hurt at the same time. Teron Armstead was hurt, Austin Jackson had gotten hurt, Greg Little had gotten hurt. Basically everybody who could have played, even Brandon Shell, had managed to get hurt. So Kendall Lamb, we signed him as a practice squatter and basically said, guess what, you're it. Now here's the thing that nobody was expecting. He started one game for the Dolphins against the New England Patriots because Teron Armstead couldn't go. And for the brief time that he was out there, he looked really good. Like, he was scarily good. He looked good enough that even Simon Clancy of the 3 Yards Per Carry podcast, if you ask him, and he's mentioned it on their podcast before. By the way, you can check that out on the 5 Reasons Sports Network as well. Even he was like, he could not believe how good Kendall Lamb was. Kendall Lamb looked like a competent starter, which I guess that's not really high praise under normal circumstances, but with the Miami Dolphins, that's about as high of a praise as you can ask for. Unfortunately, he ended up getting injured as well and suffered the instant ankle injury that got him carted off to the locker room before halftime even started. So, oops. Now he's coming back. And considering the right tackle position is open for grabs, here's the thing for you to consider. If Chris Grier really is not going to add a big-name right tackle to officially seal the right tackle position, like, let's say they don't even go after Eric Fisher, for an instance. Let's say they don't even do that much. Based on what little we saw of Kendall Lamb in this scheme, and the scheme is the same scheme, even if the offensive line coach is different. Yes, Butch Barry is not Matt Applebaum. It's going to be a different style of teaching, I'm sure. But the scheme itself is the same. If Kendall Lamb can show that he can play at the same level that he did during the New England Patriots game, maybe they have a right tackle. And maybe it doesn't have to be an expensive one. Just because you don't pay him a ton of money does not necessarily mean he's not serviceable. And something else to consider is that the baseline right now is Austin Jackson. And Austin Jackson is terrible. So even decent, just a decent lineman, will already be a massive upgrade at that position. Now, I'm not saying I would necessarily be content with Kendall Lamb unless he shows something in training camp that shows that he can do the job. And if he can, then huzzah, Miami managed to find a diamond in the rough, and Butch Barry's job now is to get the most out of him. So unless Chris Grier is literally coming down the pipeline and saying, I want you to make sure Austin Jackson starts to make me look good, which I don't think that he's going to do, because I've given him a lot of credit for the moves he's made so far, but the offensive line just seems to be the one place he doesn't seem particularly interested in making a move at. And who knows, maybe as of the release of this show, I get proven wrong. Maybe the Miami Dolphins start looking at a potential right tackle guy or a left guard guy who can replace Liam Eichenberg or let Liam Eichenberg go back to tackle. Who knows? I have no idea. But if they do decide to go with Kendall Lamb into training camp and let him compete with Austin Jackson and Liam Eichenberg, whoever else is there, Kendall Lamb in that one game that he made an audition for himself, it was good enough to get the Dolphins to decide to bring him back. So that should say at least something. I'm not saying I'm content with that, but I'm saying I'm willing to give him the chance, because if he can continue what he did against New England at right tackle, I'd be pretty good with that, at least as a stopgap. So next we're adding a tight end to the mix. It's going to be Eric Saubert, formerly of the Denver Broncos. So what does Eric Saubert bring to the table? He's not exactly a pass-catching superstar by any means, but as the 3 yards per carry crew have pointed out, Eric Saubert does have some catching capability, even if his numbers don't necessarily show it. He's mostly been used as another blocking tight end, which is fine because, again, this is what this offense calls for. They're not looking for pass-catching tight ends because otherwise they just hang on to Mike Gesicki because that's his job. For Durham Smythe, who basically got more playing time than Gesicki for a multitude of reasons, most of which is because he's a blocking tight end. So now you add Eric Saubert to this mix, and Saubert knows how to block. He can block very, very well. And that's something that Mike McDaniel is going to love having on this offense because, again, this is the exact type of tight end that he's looking for. Now, is it possible that he'll be able to go out on routes and make some catches? He has been able to split defenders before. There are clips of him making some fairly decent catches he's got soft hands. He recorded 15 receptions for 148 yards with the Broncos last season. Mind you, both of those were career highs, but that doesn't mean that's just going to be the maximum of what he's capable of. I still think that Durham Smythe is ultimately going to be considered tight end 1 unless the Miami Dolphins bring in a rookie tight end and they try to see what he can do early on. But the signing of Eric Saubert, it at least adds some extra depth to the tight end position where there wasn't any before. For better or worse, my dream of Dalton Schultz seems to be dead in the water. I would not be the least bit surprised if the Dolphins are very content to just go ahead and let Durham Smythe be the guy. Because, again, if blocking is your most important factor when you're asking for a tight end, then you already have exactly what you need in Durham Smythe and Eric Saubert. That's literally what they're best at and what they're known for. So if that's it, then, well, I'm not going to be happy with it, but I understand the philosophy. And finally, we're going to finish off with Deshaun Elliott, who is a safety. So this comes right on the heels of the news that Jordan Poyer, who I was so confident was going to join the Miami Dolphins. He seemed like he was waving the neon sign that said sign me, and I think he really was too. The problem is that the Miami Dolphins basically had a sign on that said keep out, and he basically pushed his way through the door and said, I want to join your team. I want this much. And the Dolphins basically turned around and said, okay, but we're not that interested in you. Take it or leave it. And he decided to go back to Buffalo. Oops. So unfortunately, the Jordan Poyer dream is dead. However, the Miami Dolphins did make up for it by going ahead and signing a different safety to fill that void. And it's actually somebody that at least Brandon Jones is familiar with. It's his former teammate back in college, DeShon Elliott. Now, DeShon Elliott is not exactly a superstar name. He's not somebody that everybody remembers like Jordan Poyer or even C.J. Gardner-Johnson, for instance. But DeShon Elliott is not somebody to just overlook. And it's actually pretty interesting that the Dolphins went ahead and they signed a Detroit Lions hard-hitting safety because Elliott is known as a hard hitter. He's very much like Brandon Jones in that regard. So the fact that they're going to be reunited is very interesting. But what makes it interesting with the history is that this is not the first time the Miami Dolphins have signed a hard-hitting safety from the Detroit Lions. If anybody remembers Louis Delmas, back when they originally signed him, he was the missile. And he was really fun to watch for the brief time that he was with the Dolphins. Unfortunately, he did get injured. I actually ended up watching what happened. It was during the joint practices in training camp with the Carolina Panthers, and they basically played in an open field. Like, yes, there was actual, like, football markings on the ground, but the grass was all cut up and gross. There were, like, potholes everywhere. I swear there were. And unfortunately, Louis Delmas ended up getting pretty badly injured, and that was pretty much the end for him, and I was very upset by that. I had the chance to meet Louis Delmas during a preseason dinner when he first got to the team, and he was a very eloquent, very smart man. It was actually when I was really starting to cover the Miami Dolphins way back then. So to see him go down the way that he did, it was very upsetting. And now the Miami Dolphins are going ahead and doing it again. They're bringing in a hard-hitting Detroit Lions safety who, for all intents and purposes, he's very much an up-and-comer. He's only going to be making about $1.77 million per Jordan Schultz. He did start 13 games for the Lions last year, and he started off slow, but he bounced back pretty darn quickly, and he quickly became an important part of the defensive backfield for them. So he can stop the run. He's a very good box safety. Ultimately, he finished with 96 tackles, 3 passes defended, an interception, and a forced fumble, and he's only 25 years old. So the fact that he's signing such a cheap one-year deal is possible that he's looking at this as an opportunity to be able to play with one of the best defensive coordinators in football on a very loaded secondary, again, because this is the same secondary that's still going to have Xavier Howard, Jaylen Ramsey, Javon Holland on the other side in the backfield. So maybe he's looking at this as an opportunity to say, if I can show off what I can do here in Miami, then maybe the year after that, if I can show that I'm really good, I can start to cash in, which I wouldn't blame him for trying to do. And again, he gets the opportunity to come back and play with his old teammate, Brandon Jones, from back in college. So that'd be an interesting opportunity for him. And I'm very interested to see if that's all the Miami Dolphins are going to do in the secondary. And if it is all they end up doing, well, that's still a loaded secondary. Because even though we had this dream of Jordan Poyer or somebody like C.J. Gardner-Johnson, Brandon Jones still knows how to play. And it was a big loss when he left. So don't forget about him. And now we're adding DeShon Elliott, who can do a lot of the same things. So just in case, you never know. So that's going to be it for this show. There's going to be more stuff happening, and free agency, it never really stops, does it? So we'll see what else Chris Greer has up his sleeve. Make sure you go to prizepicks.com, use the promo code 5, that's F-I-V-E, and they will match up to $100 on your initial deposit when you sign up. And if you need to protect your home or business with impact-rated windows and doors, go to All Pro Construction Builders, and they will be able to help you out. If you live anywhere in South Florida, they service Miami-Dade, Monroe, and Broward counties, and they use top-quality products that are locally made. You'll be able to deal with the owner personally because they are a family-owned and operated business, and they offer competitive and affordable pricing, as well as 100% financing with no upfront cost or down payment. Make sure you call Danny at 305-484-4429. Again, that's Danny at 305-484-4429, and make sure to mention 5 Reasons Sports to get a 10% discount on your free quote, and then you can get yourself started in less than 8 weeks. All right, that's going to be it. Thank you all so much for joining me. We will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Fins Nation.